Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, 7 lines from the top. Abaye Barav and Rav Hananya Barav and Tanut Trumas Bei Rabba, they were learning Trumas, the Sachos Trumas in the Yeshiva Rabba. Paga Bahu Rava Bar Masna, he encountered them. Amar Louis said to them, My Amrisa Betrumas de Beimar. What did you learn by Legabe Trumas in the Yeshiva of Mar, of the Rebbe? Amrullah, they said, what's your kasha? Why are you asking? What's your kasha? Amrullahu, he said to them, Amrullahu Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, shlit trumayis shenitmu ushasola. If you have plants which are truma, so you have plants that were harvested and you were kayashim truma on them, they had a din of truma, then they were replanted in the ground and now they took root. Then you have shlit truma shenitmu. They were truma, they became tome. You replanted it in the ground. Now, after they took root in the ground and you harvested a second time, now when you reharvested them, so when they took root in the ground, they lost their identity. So therefore now they're tahor. They're taharim latame because they lost their identity once taking root in the ground. They're considered something new. It's no longer, it's not tumah, it's not the old item that was, it's taharim latame. But vasurim alecho, but they're also to eat. Now, well, if they're Torah, why they're asurim lecho? Now, what we're assuming over here, what it means is that it's also lechol even to a kohen. So it's also lechol even kohen. So, but you just said, the ratio said that they're tar. So why is it asurim lecho? Amrulay, they said to him, Hachi Amar Rabba, and this is what Rabbi explained, my asurim lazarim. It's not an isser of tumah. The tumah has gone off, but there is an isser lazarim. It's also for zarim, for a non-kayan to eat it. It's also, it retains its status as truma, even though it lost its status of the tumah, but it retained its status as truma. Midrabanan, they were machmer to give it a din, to retain its din of truma, as Rashi explains in Sefas Chulin, that we're afraid that if you can nullify the din of truma, Yisrael, you can be shame, make something truma, and instead of having to give it to the kayan, he can replant it and have it grow, reharvest it, and then it's not truma anymore. So he could then be meineya to prevent and to take away the truma from the kahanim. So in order to disallow this, in order to make sure that this doesn't happen, the Rabbanan said that even though you replanted it, even though it took root, and though me'ikra din, what grows now and what's reharvested, is something new, but nevertheless, it retains its din of truma. So lagabi tuma, it's tar, but it retains its din of truma. So, the Gemara Rabbi Menashe asks him, "My kamash malan, what are you telling me over here? So, what's the chiddush that gidul truma, that the gidul and the growth from something that was planted, truma that was planted, the growth is truma? Tanina, we learned in another Mishnah. It says gidul truma. It says clearly that gidul truma is truma. So, why does it say it over here? It seems to be redundant. The tema gidul and gidul. And perhaps you'll say what the chiddush is over here is that it's gidulin, that the growth of the growth. For instance, if you're taking a bulb of an onion, and it was truma, now it was replanted in the ground, and from there grew another bulb, and from there grew another bulb, till you have a group of bulbs of onion. And if you maybe want to tell me the chiddush is that those are also considered truma, and the chiddush is something which does not disintegrate in the ground. For instance, like the case of the onion bulbs, the original one still remains in the ground; it doesn't disintegrate, as opposed to, let's say, a seed of wheat, or a seed of other types of plants, which you replanted, the original seed disintegrates. Other things grow, it grows from it, There's a growth from it, but the original seed disintegrates. So perhaps you want to tell me, like, for instance, the case of the onion bulbs, which is Dover She'ein Zarakala, that the Gidulim are also Truma. Hanami Tanina. We already learned this in another Mishnah. The Mishnah says that Teval Gidulav Mutorim Bedover Shazarakala. Teval, which is Teval, but you replanted it, the Gidulim are Mutter. And that's Bedovar Shazarakala. That's Mutter. It's not considered Tevel. That's only something which is Zarakala, which disintegrates in the ground. Aval Bedovar Shein Zarakala. But if it's something which is Ein Zarakala, I feel Gidulim Asurim, it's also. So therefore, we would say the same thing by Truma as well, and therefore, there's no Chiddush here. Ishtikum, they were quiet, they didn't have an answer. Amrulay, they said to Rav Manash, Midish Milach Baha, do you hear Pshat, an explanation of this? Amrlahu, he said to them, Hachi Amarasheshes, my Asur, when it says that it's also, when it says that when you replant, and it's saying now that it's also, what it means is, my asurim lekahan. It says, what it means is, it's not pshat that it's asurim lazorim, it's asurim lekahana. The isser is to kahana. Yes, we know that it retains its din as truma, and yet we know as well that the original truma fell off, but nevertheless, it's asurim lekahana. Why is that? Since there's a psul of hesach hadas. Since when you replanted in the ground, there was no shimur, the truma wasn't guarded. There's a mitzvah on truma that it has to be guarded. That truma, there's a mitzvah to have to guard it. Now, when you replant it in the ground, then you are not watching it. It's out of sight. It's out of mind. There's no shimur, and therefore it becomes possible. Therefore, it becomes possible, and it's also even to a kohen. So, that's fine if you tell me that the reason that it's possible is a psula guf. Meaning, it's not because there's a chashash that it wasn't guarded that it became tomei. That's not the reason. It's inherently possible. The truma has kedusha. The truma has to be elevated. The Torah requires you to guard it. If there's a lapse in that, it becomes possible. There's a chasarin, there's a lacking in the shimur required for this kedusha, for davar kaddish, it becomes possible. Then I understand it. It was replanted in the ground. There was a lack of shimur. It's possible. Elaman the Omar hes chadas psul tumahava. But if you say that the reason for hes chadas is a psul of Tuma, because since it was not guarded, we have to suspect and be chayshish, maybe came into contact with the Dover Tomei, and it's a suffix of its Tomei. Ma'ikal Meimar. What's the problem over here? If you replant it, even something which is Varei Tomei, replanting it now removes the Tuma that was there. It becomes, it's nishrish, it becomes mechuber to the karka, the Tuma goes off. Certainly, it's not going to become Tomei when it's planted in the ground. So why should that be a problem over here? So that shouldn't puzzle it. The Itmar hesach hadas. Rav Yochanan amar psul tumah. Rav Yochanan says it's possible. Why? Because it's a suffix. Perhaps it became Tomei. Rav Shimon ben Lakish amar psul haguf haver. And Shimon ben Lakish says that it's a psul haguf. So therefore, we understand it if you say it's a psul haguf. But if it's a psul tuma, why should therefore this be also to the Kohanim? The Gemara, before answering this question, is now going into analyze this machlokes of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, is a psul tuma or a psul haguf, and then we'll return to this kasha on the Mishnah. There's a dion in the Achreinim when we say that it's a psul, hesach hadas is a psul, because it was lacking in the shimur. Is that a psul deraisa or psul derabanan? And that's a whole discussion in the Achreinim. The Sasemes says that l'chayra, you would seem to say that it's a psul derabanan, because even though it's a violation of the mishmeres trumoisai, of guarding the truma, but wherever we see that should therefore make the truma pasul midaraisa, and therefore it should have to be left to ultimately burn. So therefore he says, l'chayra, you would say that it's a psul derabanan. But on the other hand, he asks, well, as we'll see, then if it's possible because of this mishmeres shumoisai, now if you say it's a psul tuma, it's zicher not a psul. It's a zicher not a psul deraisa. It would only be psul derabbanan because you have a chazaka. But nevertheless, what we do see is that ultimately this is going to be burnt. So if this is, whether it's a psul aguf or a psul tuma, but if this is a derabbanan, which would seem to be the case, however, how can we then actively, ultimately burn it because of a violation of psul derabbanan? So he leaves it with a tzarachian. Nevertheless, there is a psul. If there's a lack of shimur, there is a psul on the truma. So we have this machlokes: is it a psul a guf or is it a psul of tumah? So now the Gemara is going to analyze this machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan Amar psul tumah, he says it's a psul tumah. It's a possibility that it became tomei shimyav elio v'yitarena shemimah. If Eliyahu and Navi will come and say there was no tumah, it did not come into contact with the tumah. Notwithstanding, it was left unguarded, there was no tumah, then we would accept it and it would be mutar l'achila. Rav Shimon Lakish Amar psul guf. He says no, it's a psul guf. Whether or not it came into contact with tumah is irrelevant. The fact that there was no shimur, that automatically apostles it. It's a pagam in the kedusha and the elevated status of it, and it becomes possible. Even if Eliyahu Navi comes and says it did not come into any contact with tumah, it still would be possible. Rabbi Shmuel ben Oishel Rabbi Yochanan ben Roika Omer Lul Katan Haya ben Kevesh LeMizbeach. They had between the ramp leading up to the Mizbeach and the Mizbeach itself, they put a lul between that space on the floor, between the ramp and between the Mizbeach. They put a small cavity between the ramp and the kevesh and the Mizbeach achitzin. B'ma'arov shel kevesh, on the west side of the kevesh, shesham hayuzakim psulei chatos ha'if, and they would throw over there. If there was a chatos ha'if which became possible, the psulim of it, they would throw it into that cavity, with uber tzurasan, and they would leave it overnight. And by leaving it overnight, that would change the appearance. It would dry up. It would change the appearance. On the basis sreifa, and then they would take it outside to burn it on the basis sreifa. Now, the point over here is that if there was a psul, it became possible. So therefore, we wouldn't burn it immediately. Now, we're talking about a psul that is not a psul in the korban itself, in the boss of the korban itself. It's a psul that it's either in the balim, a side psul. So that type, when it becomes possible in that way, now you can't be makriv the korban because it's possible. But it cannot be burnt immediately. We can't burn it right away. We have to now have the psul in the korban itself. So we leave it overnight, where now it has a psulina. The basar itself, or the oif itself, has a psulina, and therefore you can burn it. So it's not the tuber tzurosa itself that creates the dinner sreifa. That's just a description of what we do, is that we leave it till the next morning. But we leave it till the next morning, then it has a psul of lina. It has a psul of lina, and therefore now it can be taken to be burnt. Then you burn it, now you burn it. Now if you say that the hesach hadas is a psul of tuma, we understand why you can't burn it immediately, why it needs ibertzura, you have to wait until the next morning to burn it, because over here there's a hesach hadas. It was put in the lul. Now it was put in the lul, that means there was no shima. If you say bishloma that it's a psul of tuma, we understand that you can't burn it immediately because it's only a sulfate, and therefore shema yava eliyahu tarah. Maybe Eliyahu and Navi will come and say that it really wasn't tome. If it was tome, you would burn it immediately, but maybe it wasn't. So that's why you have to wait till the next morning, where it has a psul of elina, and then you can burn it. Eli Amrat Psul Haguf. But if you say that the Hesach Hadas is Psul Haguf, well, here there's a Hesach Hadas, and that pasul, that's an inherent psul in the korban itself. Lama Ibur Tzura. Why do you need Ibur Tzura? You should be able to burn it immediately. We learned about Tanya Zaklal. What's a klal? Kol shepsula begufay. Anything which is a psul in the korban itself, you sarf miyad, you burn it immediately. But bedam ubebalim, if it's a psul in the dam, it's not a psul in the korban itself. Let's say the dam spilled on the floor, then it's not a psul in the korban. Now, even though the korban can't be kosher if the dam spilled on the floor, but nevertheless, it's not a psul in the korban itself. Or bebalim, let's say by a korban pesach, where the korban has to be eaten by the balim, and the balim became tlomei, so they can't eat it. Now, even though the korban cannot be a kosher korban, but the psul is not in the korban to ubar tzurolson, then you cannot burn it right away. You have to wait till the next morning where there's a psulina, where the korban itself became possible, there's an inherent psul in the korban, and then you burn it. You can't burn it right away. So if you say that Hesach Hadas is a psul in the goof of the korban, why do you need two Bartzar also? Why do you have to wait till the next morning? You should say burn it immediately. Now Tosfos asks the kasha, how do we know that this is the only psul over here? How do we know that the psul of chatasai, if they were thrown into the lul, is only because there was a psul that was a Hesach Hadas? Maybe there was a psul that of dam or balim, and therefore that's not a psul begufay, and therefore you can't burn it right away. To burn it right away, like Rashi explains, is a pagam in the kachim. It shows lack of cause for the kachim. You have to wait till it has a psul in the korban itself. So how do you know, therefore, that was thrown in the lul was because of a psul of Hesach Hadas? Maybe it was a psul of dam balim, which does require lina ibud surah. So Tosfos answers, but in Chanami it doesn't make a difference. Once you throw it into the lul, now there is Hesach Hadas. There's Hesach Hadas right here, and if that is a psul begufay, now automatically right now there's an inherent psul in the korban. It should be burnt right away. Why do you have to wait to the next morning? Why is it you need ibud surah also? So Reish Lakish answers, Omer le Reish Lakish said Rav Yochanan, Hai Tana debei Rabba baravuahu. This Tana over here, that Rishmal ben Aishal Reichem Broka, is the Tana he's the Tana debei Rabba baravua do Omar, who says Afil pigol tolin ibud surah. He says even if there's a psul in the korban, it also needs ibud surah. So therefore, don't ask me a kasha over here by Hesach Hadas, why didn't he ibud surah? He's going like the shita that holds that even pigol, even something which was a psul in the korban itself, you also need ibud surah. It's always you require ibud surah before burning the korban. So therefore, we don't burn it unless there's a physical change in the korban. The physical change in the korban now is when we allow you to burn it. Now that the korban already has undergone a physical change, we allow you to burn it. So don't ask me a kasha from here, because that doesn't show anything about Hesach Hadas. All psulim require ibud surah. So the Gemara will now continue in the next Amud this discussion of Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan and how it relates to the Mishnah in Trumas.